What's up, everybody? Jack here, another episode of The Big and Bold. And it's a bit of a bittersweet moment. You get to talk about Michigan in the playoff, but unfortunately, we're talking about it from a 34-11 loss for the Wolverines. So, not great. Definitely not how we wanted that game to go. How is it, though, that Michigan, by the end of the first half, was down 27-3? We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about what Georgia did well, what Michigan did poorly, and by the end of it, kind of just have my overall, this is what the game was. And I have a few points to go over, but if you watched the game, it was difficult. It was difficult to watch. I think that what was so surprising was we kind of expected Michigan to have some difficulty scoring. That wasn't too surprising. You're playing the best defense in football. But where I was shocked was the amount of points Georgia was able to score. That's something I'm going to talk about more, but I got 3 key points for what Georgia did well and 3 key points for what Michigan did poorly. So let's jump right into it and start breaking down why the game went the way it did. And I think the most obvious thing, for one, is that Stetson Bennett looked like a stud. Okay, I mean, for the difficulties he had against Alabama in the SEC championship game, he ended up going out and throwing for 313 yards and 3 touchdowns. He had a fantastic game. When pressure was put on him by the Michigan pass rush, he was able to use his legs to get out, and he had about 30 yards on the ground rushing as well. But it wasn't his rushing totals that were so impressive. It's his ability to maneuver in and out of the pocket. Stetson Bennett has really proven that you're talking about, we're 14 games into the season. Georgia's about to play for national championship. But there were doubts about him after that Alabama loss. He led them to 12 straight wins, and the next thing you know, they get knocked off by Alabama, and everyone wants to throw Stetson Bennett under the bus. But at the end of the day, he had an incredible game against a fantastic Michigan defense. And secondly, big thing that hurt Michigan, and this plays into the Stetson Bennett conversation, is his ability to throw to the running backs and tight ends. That's what Georgia's done all year, and it's what they did to affect, in this game. Brock Bowers was completely ignored for the first touchdown of the game. He was left open. It was ridiculous. But he ended up with 5 catches for 55 yards and a touchdown. Cook, out of the backfield, 4 catches, 112 yards, touchdown. Burton, big 57-yard grab for a score. McIntosh had 32 yards through the air. White had 10 yards. They were hitting their running backs and tight ends constantly, and Michigan knew they were going to do that. Over the course of the game, Stetson Bennett would go to the flat, left or right side of the field, hit his running backs or tight ends behind the line of scrimmage, and they'd move up the field on those little screens, and it worked to perfect effect. And it's what makes sense. It's kind of crazy that Michigan was able to stop, or at least hold back, the best offense in college football in the form of Ohio State. But Georgia's methodical offense that neutralized the Michigan pass rush is what got them. Aiden Hutchinson and David Ojabo weren't able to hit home against Stetson Bennett because they were getting the ball out to the flats all game. Why weren't they able to adjust to it? I'm not sure. I think some of it has to do with the fact that when Michigan did try to stop those passes behind the line of scrimmage, left or right, Georgia ends up running up the middle for 7 yards. Now you're looking at 2nd and 2, 2nd and 3, and their offensive playbook is completely open, and then they can take the occasional shot down the field. We saw that with the Bennett to Cook pass. They had a mismatch on Junior Colson that they were able to capitalize on, and it went for a touchdown. So the Georgia offensive game plan really was impressive. I was shocked by the amount of points they were able to score early. But it was 14-0 before you knew it at the end of the first quarter, and that's really when you knew Michigan was in trouble. But third point, and something that really affected Michigan offensively, was the Georgia pass rush. They hit home for 4 sacks. Michigan didn't have a single sack in the game. Whether it was, Smith, Dean, Jordan Davis pushing the middle of the offensive line, they were able to hit home. And it wasn't just sacks, it was the pressures. They were all over Cade in that game, and that really threw him off balance. He just wasn't able to operate. Occasionally he got out of the pocket, but that just hasn't been the recipe for success for Michigan, and that's what Georgia did to perfection. They got in Cade McNamara's face, they shut down the run, they neutralized the Michigan pass rush, and Cade McNamara wasn't bringing them back. So I'll talk about Cade McNamara a little bit more after, we get into kind of what lost Michigan the game, not just what Georgia did to win the game. But when you look at Michigan, when the opposing team has as many 5 stars in their front 7 as you do on about your whole team, that's a real concern. That's just a matchup nightmare for you. A stat came out actually that over the last 3 recruiting classes, Georgia had 40 players in the top 100. Michigan has 7. I'll repeat that, 40 to 7. I mean, what are you going to do about that? That's just, you're just out-recruited. I don't think that this was a situation where, the Michigan game plan wasn't good enough or they didn't execute their game plan well enough. Don't get me wrong, there were mistakes. There were certainly mistakes, but that's not what lost Michigan the game. They did shoot themselves in the foot, but I think that at the end of the day, it was very evident, and I'll talk about a couple things in this little bit, kind of talking about the recruiting of the 2 programs. Georgia's a top 2 team in the country in terms of total talent. Only Alabama really is up there with Georgia. And you say, well, so's Ohio State, and Michigan beat Ohio State. Well, that was a matchup thing for Michigan. Michigan was a matchup nightmare for Ohio State. You're talking about a team that had difficulty stopping the run and their offense operating efficiently against a strong pass rush. That's why Oregon beat them. That's why Utah gave them hell in the Rose Bowl. And that's why Michigan beat them. Not to mention you had the home field advantage in that game. Georgia's a matchup nightmare for the Wolverines. A team that can stop the run, get to the quarterback, and operate methodically to get down the field and neutralize an effective pass rush. That's what Georgia's able to do, and that absolutely killed Michigan. It was an obvious speed and athleticism advantage that Georgia had. Michigan tried to work the outside of the field as well, close to the sideline. But you could see, it was obvious, Nakobe Dean sprinting to the sideline to getting to these Michigan running backs and receivers. Just for an example there, the Georgia athleticism and speed on the field was phenomenal, and Michigan just wasn't able to counter that offensively. They just don't have the athletes to do that. The Georgia defense is freaky, athletic, and fast. Their offensive line is big, full of 5 stars on the offensive line. Michigan's just got out-recruited. It is what it is. I don't think, again, I pointed out Georgia had a strong game plan. But the recruiting advantage that they've had for the last 4-ish years at least, it's what set Georgia apart from Michigan, in my mind, in this game. And it's why we've seen Notre Dame get embarrassed twice in the playoff. Michigan State, now Michigan, Cincinnati, Washington to a certain degree. These teams are deserving of making it to the playoff. But you're going against Clemson, Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia. These teams that are just on another level. Of course, player development is a thing and coaching is a thing. Like, that matters. But I really think recruiting means more. And yeah, you're going to have examples specifically in the regular season where I think that recruiting isn't everything. There's been plenty of teams where, the recruiting rankings don't matter. But when it comes to the playoff so far, if you're looking for, what's that common denominator? It's recruiting rankings. It just is what it is. So unless Michigan can recruit on par with Georgia or any other team out there consistently making the playoff, they're not going to be a threat for a national championship because the sport just isn't set up to where they can without the recruiting base that they need. So that was evident when you watched this game that recruiting was a big deal. But my next point, though, again, talked about what Georgia does well, what Michigan does well. When Michigan can't run the football, they're not going to win football games. And Hassan Haskins was 9 for 39. The offense just wasn't working. It just wasn't working without the ability to run the football. So when you can't run the ball up the middle, the defense is too fast for you to work behind the line of scrimmage, in the flats, and to run those screens. You have to try to press the ball down the field. And Cade McNamara does not do that well. He was 11 for 19, 106 yards, and 2 interceptions. He also fumbled the ball. Miraculously ended up recovering it somehow, but not a good game for Cade. And I think that this was a game that showed that yeah, when the things are going well, when you can run the football, when your defense is playing at a high level, Cade McNamara is a fine quarterback to lead Michigan. He's a phenomenal leader, great presence in the locker room. There's no doubt about that. But the problem for me is that he hasn't won Michigan a single game. That's something I've said before on the channel. He hasn't won anything for Michigan. He's been the quarterback for them when they've won games. But his best game of the season was Michigan State, and it was a loss. Next I'd probably argue his Wisconsin game was pretty solid. But even in the Ohio State win, the Iowa win, it wasn't the passing game at all. Yeah, sure, 3 or 4 nice throws that kept chains moving and that kept the defense on their toes. But it wasn't the Michigan passing game in any of their wins. And this was evident that if they want to get over the hump, they have to develop their passing game. Now, I'm not trying to stack up J.J. McCarthy's passing stats with Cade's, because you're talking about coming in garbage time. But J.J. McCarthy just looked like the better quarterback. He threw phenomenal footballs. He was able to get out of the pocket. That's what Michigan needed to be in this game, period. Not to say J.J. McCarthy would have won them the game. I am not saying that at all. But what I am saying is that for them to have a chance in this game, from the quarterback position, they desperately needed someone who could get out of the pocket and make something out of nothing and put the ball on a tightrope because of sticky Georgia coverage. That is not Cade McNamara whatsoever. That's what J.J. McCarthy did when he was in the game. He throws an incredible football. He's fantastic with his legs. He's just the perfect mold of what basically the modern quarterback is becoming. The modern quarterback recruit is a strong arm with a tight spiral, the ability to run, which is something that's becoming a must-have now for the quarterback position. JJ is clearly the quarterback for them next year, though. And I'll talk about that more in another video that's coming up pretty soon when I preview the 2022 Michigan team. But J.J. McCarthy did play well. And my next point here, moving away from, the why they lost part of it, but looking at the positives, right? And this isn't unique to this. I mean, you're going to see this everywhere you look at, people talking about how this Orange Bowl went and, breaking it down for Michigan. But the future is bright. You're going to see that out there. That's kind of something getting thrown around right now for Michigan. The future's bright. At one point, J.J. McCarthy, Donovan Edwards, and Andrel Anthony, all freshmen, had bright moments in this game. J.J. McCarthy threw the only touchdown for Michigan of the game to Andrel Anthony, and he hit Donovan Edwards for a fantastic 43-yard gain off of a nice pass. All three of those guys had nice moments, and again, all three freshmen. That's a big deal for the team's future, and this was a big deal for them to get important reps in a playoff game. Nobody on this team's been in the playoff. Jim Harbaugh hasn't been in the playoff yet, This was a coaching staff full of plenty of first-year guys with the team. At times, it's their first year in that capacity. Sherrone Moore on the offensive line. Mark McDonald had never called plays until this season at defensive coordinator. So tons of valuable reps for young players, especially J.J. McCarthy and Donovan Edwards, getting out there, lining up at running quarterback and running back. That's valuable to play an elite team and an elite defense in the playoff. Michigan showed they can beat Ohio State, that they can win a Big Ten title and make it to the playoff. Now they've got to try and take it to the next level, and this could be the start of something. That's what they're saying. Blake Corum said, "Hey, we will be back." Jim Harbaugh saying, this is just the beginning. And whether you believe it or not, we'll see. I mean, we saw a Michigan State team make the playoff, and the program kind of fell apart for them at the end of the Mark D'Antonio era. Washington, they made it into the playoff, and things haven't been the same for them since that playoff spot. But hopefully, things are going to continue moving up for them. But not only that, you just talk about the big picture of this. Michigan being the first team to go from unranked to making it into the playoff, that's a huge deal. There were a lot of people that thought they were going to win like 7 games. I thought they were going to win 9. End up winning 12 and again, beat Ohio State, win a Big Ten title, make it into the playoff. I mean, that's a fantastic season. It's a shame it ended the way it did, but let's be honest, we've seen this ending for different teams, like I've pointed out. just is what it is when, yeah, you deserve to make it to that stage of college football into the playoff, but just not the same. Not you're talking about two very different teams here between Michigan and Georgia. But ultimately, those are my takeaways from the game. Keep an eye out on the channel for my preview of the Michigan team for next year. I'm going to look at their schedule, offense, defense, and give you guys that. So, if you're a Michigan football nerd like I am, then you can get a nice early look into what next year's going to be. Really excited to break that down for you guys. Hope everyone had a great holiday, great Christmas, New Year. It's really unfortunate college football is all but over. We got another Georgia-Alabama national championship game coming up, so there's that, I guess. But I'd rather it be Michigan. But at the end of the day, hey, if Michigan beat Michigan State, they'd be the number one team in the country, and they'd be playing Cincinnati, not Georgia, to make it to the national championship game. Just didn't work out. It just didn't work out. It is what it is. But again, thank you for listening, everybody. Please like and subscribe. Let me know in the comments what you thought about the game. And enjoy the rest of your day, everybody. Go Blue.